Now, what about Christians' historical record? Let's use the crucifixion, probably the most important event in the history of mankind. What does Islam do? What does this book do with the crucifixion? Well, in one verse, it shuts down the crucifixion. Has another man die in Jesus' place, puts him on the cross instead of Jesus, saying that there was no crucifixion. And in one verse, it just shut down everything we know about Jesus Christ. That's what the Quran does. Is that historical? No. Why don't we go back to the evidence from the first and second century? Why don't we go back to Thales and Phlegon, these two Greek, Samaritan historian and Roman writer who were debating this event in 52 AD. That's 20 years after Christ's death. And in the debate, they mentioned that when Christ died, the earth shook and the sun went dark. Don't you think you'd rather trust them than the Quran that was written in the 7th and 8th century? I'd go to the 1st century, wouldn't you? What about Lucian the Greek satires that refers to the death of Jesus Christ? Or Mara bar Serapin, who has a letter to the pagan in 73 AD? Or what about the Jewish historian Josephus, who between 83 and 90 AD not only talks about the death of Jesus, but he mentions also the brother of Jesus, James' death, and he mentions that the Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Ooh, I love that. And then what are we going to do with Tacitus? A Roman historian who hated Christians, had nothing good to say about Christianity, yet he talked about the death of Jesus. He said that happens during the time of Pontius Pilate under the rule of Tiberius. That's why we know it was in 33 AD, because of Tacitus. So I've given you Greek, Roman, and Jewish historians from the 1st and 2nd century who all agree that it was Jesus who was on the cross. Yet even with just this example, we can see that Christianity has a far better record than Islam historically because of the outside hostile historical evidence. Now, what about the textual record we have? Remember I said earlier that we have the tafsir and the tahriq and the hadith and the sirah of Jesus, and we have it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and also the writings of Paul. You remember I said that? Let's do a comparative. Now, I'm going to step on all your toes. You're not going to like what I'm going to do next, because you're not going to like the dates I did put there. I'm going to put the most liberal dates I can find. But I'm doing that for a purpose. Let's see when they were written down, and let's see how earlier they are. So when you talk about Jesus, we talk about the tahriq. That would be the histories of the early church written by Luke in the book of Acts, written between 52 and 62 AD. That's within 20 to 30 years of Christ's death. Paul's letters to the different churches, that's the tafsir of Jesus. That was written between 48 and 65 AD, within 15 to 34 years. You have the first sirah and the first hadith written by Mark in 70 AD, 37 years of Christ's death. Then you have the next two of Matthew and Luke written in 80 AD. That's 47 years after Christ's death. And finally, you have the last sirah and the last hadith written by John in 90 AD. That's 57 years after Christ's death. Within 60 years, you have the entire New Testament. Within 60 years. Notice that all of these writers, all of these New Testament writers lived in the same place Jesus lived. And they either knew him personally or they got the material from others who saw what he did and heard what he said. So, comparing Christianity versus Islam. When was the earliest biography saying for the both faiths? When we look at Christianity, everything comes together within 60 years of Christ's death, written by those who either saw or heard what he did and heard what he said, or those who got it from the eyewitnesses. Whereas when you look at Islam, everything we know about Muhammad, what he said and he did, comes from 400 to 900 years later. Which would you guess is more authoritative? Are you listening to this, Abdul? Are you starting to get the idea? You've got a problem here, don't you? Yeah, no answer. Just put your thumb up. You're starting to come around. As a comparison, if we had to depend on sources for Jesus, comparable to what the Muslims are dependent on for Muhammad, Jesus would not begin to appear until the 3rd to 5th century. How would we defend him? With statistics like these, how can Raymond suggest that Muhammad is much more historically supported than Jesus? Supposition number 3. If Muhammad did not exist, how do we understand the Sunni-Shiite divide? This is what he says. If Muhammad didn't exist, then no descendants existed either. So how can we understand the Sunni-Shiite divide? Why would there be a huge contention involving the blood descendants of a man who had never existed? Now, to begin with, the first we even hear about Ali as Muhammad's choice is with Sahih Bukhari, volume 5. While the other counter-argument, which goes against that, exactly contradicts it, is also found in Sahih Bukhari, volume 5, book number 64, proving that his companions didn't even know what side they were on. Remember, the canonical version of Sahih Bukhari does not appear until the 14th to 15th century. So this is probably a much later story redacted back. But most importantly, this is a political dispute between Persians and Arabs, not theological. So it could have been created at any time by either the Abbasids or the Ottomans in the 14th and 15th century, and then redacted back first to al-Bukhari and then to the person of Muhammad himself in order to give authority to whichever position, Persian or Arab, you needed for that time and for your place. This is not surprising, as movements, both political and religious, often split, and the Sunni-Shiite divide could easily have arisen for the same reason as the earlier Abbasid revolt, which at its very roots was due to disquiet over the earlier Umayyad dynasty. And here is another response. I'm not going to read through this. You can read through it when your own time, when you get the PowerPoint, by Dr. Pat Andrews. He just shows you, if you have that problem, what are you going to do with the King Arthur and Camelot legend? Did Camelot really exist? Was there a round table? Was there a stone with a sword in it that little King Arthur had to pull out? Well, Disney made that one up. And it's still being made up even today. Legends are exactly that. They get concocted, they get recreated, they get embellished, they get deleted and created century after century, depending on what your needs are. And that's exactly what we're finding with the Sunni-Shiite divide. What about his reference to there are no incontrovertible proofs of Muhammad's non-existence? Boy, that's a mouthful. My response, I don't have to prove a thing here. The statement makes no sense to begin with. How can someone prove someone who did not exist? It is the person who claims that someone did exist who bears the burden of proof, not me. Okay? I turn that right back. Abdul, you're not supposed to agree with that. Don't say yes. Say, ooh, that's something I hadn't thought about. Raymond admits in his video that he hasn't even looked at our evidence. Why in the world is he confronting me if he's not even looked at my videos? That shows you right away that the fact that he hasn't even looked at our argument suggests that he is either naive or simply arrogant or is being typically Arabic with his one-upmanship style. I think it's the latter. The theories we have, Raymond believes, are only out there. The reason I'm doing this, he says, is because those of us who perpetuate them use us simply out of a dislike for Islam. Folks, he is correct. I do dislike Islam. But I absolutely love Muslims. Do you see the distinction I'm making? Yes. I want nothing to do with Islam, but I love Muslims. They are my favorite people. Why in the world have I spent 45 years working with them if I didn't love them? However, isn't Abraham just as guilty of disliking Islam? Which would invalidate his later arguments for Muhammad's existence based on the tradition. Be careful, that argument goes both ways. Are you seeing this, Abdul? Don't throw that at me, I'll throw it right back in your face. Supposition number 5. Since the traditions of Muhammad are so embarrassing, why in the world even write them? I love this one. This is what David Wood took me on about 2 years ago. We had a debate on this very subject. And he said, Jay, how can you have this guy? He is so embarrassing. Look at all the things he did wrong. Look at all the weaknesses he had. He was deceitful. He killed his enemies. He married a 7-year-old girl and consummated when she was 9 and he was 53. Ooh, that's just terrible. How can, look at this guy. He was demon-possessed. He tried to commit suicide. Goodness sakes, he started wearing female clothes like he was a transvestite. How can you invent somebody like that, Jay? Here's the problem. The difficulty is this. Raymond and David Wood, they are embarrassed by Muhammad because they are comparing him to Jesus. Therefore, they're looking at Muhammad through the grid of Christian cultural views. They're looking at Muhammad and they want him to be Jesus, but he will never be Jesus. No one can compare to Jesus. Of course, for us, he's absolutely embarrassing. But Muslims don't do that. They don't look at Muhammad through the grid of Jesus at all. Therefore, they love his virility. They love his violence and his denigration of others. In fact, Muslims, whenever I bring this up, they tell me this. Compared to Jesus, Muhammad is much greater. Jesus, he never married, he had no family, he never ruled, he never went to war, he never stood up against his oppressors, he never owned anything, he was a wimp. That's what they tell me. I want to follow Muhammad. He went to war. He had a wife. He had children. He controlled the whole country. He is his model that we use all over the Muslim world today. And he was a man. Hoorah. Jesus was a woman. For a Muslim, they love Muhammad because of that. We hate him because he's not like Jesus. Be careful, folks. The more you show these things to Muslims, the more I agree with you. Absolutely. Why don't you come on home? He's a much better man than Jesus. What kind of model is Jesus? Didn't do anything that I want to do. What's more, if you're looking at his depression or his attempted suicide, his demon possession or his cross-dressing, even his homosexual tendencies, which Raymond loves to talk about, David Wood, they love to go on this. These are typical crises of every prophet. Every prophet goes through these crises. But they overcome every one of them. He didn't remain depressed. He didn't continue to wear dresses. He didn't commit suicide. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived. Every prophet goes to them, and then they conquer them. And by conquering them, they prove and they show to us what we can do, proving that they were true prophets. And the same happened to Muhammad, a true prophet, because he surmounted these problems in their eyes. So be careful about using that argument, folks. Every time I use that argument, Muslims want to invite me to tea. Say, yes, thank you. Why don't you come back to Muhammad? What a guy. Hoorah, he's my man. Supposition number 6. Mecca is not an argument against Muhammad. Ooh, boy, I love this one. Though Raymond did not watch any of our videos on Mecca, his response suggests that we are simply arguing from silence, and an absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence. He says that in his video. I couldn't believe that he was actually quoting Dr. I forgot his name now, Jamal Madawi from the last century. At some point in the future, references for Mecca will exist. My response, if there was no Mecca, then it doesn't matter what Muhammad or Mahbad you find. If he does not come from Mecca, then he is not the Muhammad of Islam. So it absolutely does matter that Mecca existed. In 1995, we had almost no evidence, back there when I debated Dr. Badawi. But today, we have all the evidence. We have coins, we have inscriptions, we have buildings, we have manuscripts. So it is now the Muslims who are arguing from silence. Whoops, I finished that one there. His example of Troy that he uses is a non sequitur, since we have ample references for ancient history for the existence of Troy. We just did not know where it was situated until now. Conversely, we have no references from ancient history for even the existence of any place called Mecca in Arabia. Now, I'm going to go through this very quickly because you've seen this before. Remember that stool that I showed you at the very beginning? If you shut down Mecca, you shut down the other two. The other two are absolutely dependent